It's not compromise in the sense of compromising a principle. It's just being creative, realistic, pragmatic, and not elevating sort of abstract ideology over real people. We can come up with ways to be more inclusive.
Today's episode of Pacific Time is being released on International Pronouns Day, a day that invites all of us to express solidarity with the trans community and to honor the courage it takes for people to claim pronouns that match who they truly are. For many of us who are fortunate enough to inhabit the identity we were born with, pronouns can feel simple, even invisible. But for trans and non-binary people, these same words can be life-affirming. And too often, they've also been weaponized. During the 2024 presidential election, discomfort with learning new pronouns was exploited to fuel hateful demagoguery. That wedge became the cover for rolling back hard-fought civil rights. Yes, it's a terrifying environment for trans people in America. But if you think these setbacks affect only a small minority, you're wrong. Relaxing civil rights for one group is relaxing them for all of us. I've seen this up close. Friends and family members of mine have transitioned, and I've watched them wrestle with their identity, make the courageous decision to live as they truly are, and then thrive. That lived courage and the joy on the other side is what makes today's conversation especially meaningful. Welcome to Pacific Time. I'm your host, Greg Amrofell. In this episode of Pacific Time, I sit down with Shannon Minter, a trans man and one of the nation's leading LGBTQ rights attorneys. He's the legal director of the National Center for LGBTQ Rights and was part of the landmark fight for marriage equality in California and now does work protecting trans youth and families. Shannon has been at the forefront of nearly every major LGBTQ rights struggle of the past generation. We'll explore how the federal courts have shifted, why West Coast states may need to take the lead on protecting equality, and what it means to defend democracy through the lens of civil rights. If you've ever wondered how law, justice, and personal dignity intersect with the question of West Coast autonomy, you'll want to hear Shannon's take. When I asked him how the West Coast could become a stronger sanctuary for LGBTQ rights, Shannon surprised me. He challenged my framing, and he calls for something more: conciliatory conversation between different people with different beliefs. Exactly what the LGBTQ movement has fought for everyone to have a seat at the table.
I think it would be wonderful for those states, the blue states, to try to create the strongest, most sensible protections for LGBTQ people for many reasons, to provide an example, a model of how doing so can benefit everybody, and to make sure that we have places in this country where LGBTQ people are included and supported and can thrive. I'll tell you what I don't think is helpful, which is this whole notion of a sanctuary or even like a firewall. It's not helpful to reinforce this polarity. This sense of division, the sense that our country's at war, the sense that there's a blue state, red state divide that is so intense that blue states would have to literally create sanctuaries for people fleeing from red states. And I say that as somebody who lives in a red state. That kind of rhetoric, that kind of mindset makes our lives worse. It makes the places where we live want to retaliate. It creates backlash. It reinforces what is already a terrible public divide. Like people here, while I'm in Texas, not everybody, but many people here identify as conservative, have kind of negative views of states like California, for example. And the more that California or any of the blue states like aggressively positions itself as we're the antithesis of Texas or these ignorant, backward red states, it just makes people here want to dig in even more. And so and it's just not a good way to make change. It's not a good way to be in the world, to be antagonistic towards entire groups of people and write them off as benighted and ignorant and beyond the pale that all you can possibly do is create a place for people to flee to. Because, most of us are not going to be living where we live in red states. And what is so much more helpful is to provide constructive examples and to make sure that, there are places where things really do get so bad here that it's unbearable. And for those of us who can, under those circumstances, leave, that there is a place to go to. But publicly touting that is sort of a sanctuary honestly doesn't help.
What then is the way forward? What is the best way to cool the temperatures and to advocate for the same rights for everybody everywhere in the country?
So we do need elected officials and people living in more progressive states to stand up for things that matter and to make sure they hold the line on anti-discrimination policies and inclusion policies that are so important to LGBTQ people, also to immigrants, to other people who are women, people who are under attack right now. It's more like, how do you do that in a way that builds more public support across the country and that helps create, bridge what is now just this terrible, terrible political divide that's causing people to double down and take ever more extreme positions. So, I'll give you an example to make this all less abstract. Like, one of the most contentious issues for transgender people, which is an issue I'm very involved in and work on that. I'm transgender myself, and I really care about these issues. Is sports. Like, most of people in this country, very high majority of people, don't support transgender kids being able to play sports based on who they are, their gender identity, and people are really concerned about transgender girls playing on girls' teams, and they're very concerned that is not fair. Now, a lot of this is based on not understanding how it works in practice, not understanding that a lot of transgender girls go through medical treatments that mean they don't have any possible athletic advantage over other girls. And when we can patiently explain all that, and when we do, it's very effective. But California right now is doing something very helpful, which is California is a huge state. They have very protective policies about transgender students. This issue is blowing up right now in California. It's become a huge controversy inside the state. President Trump inflamed that on purpose by doxing a high school student, a transgender girl who was competing in a track meet in California. So what California could do is sort of double down on a very all or nothing policy position and say, we don't care what Trump thinks or what people in other places think, or even what most of the public here thinks. We're gonna say every transgender girl gets to play on girls' teams, any girls' team, any sport, any age, any level of competition, and that's it. And if you don't like it, too bad for you, which would just it would make life worse for transgender people, create more backlash. Instead, what they're doing, which is so terrific, is trying to come up with policy approaches that eliminate any potential concerns about unfairness. So, in response to President Trump doxing that poor kid and trying to get like a mob mentality going, like to target this child and her family, this California Interscholastic Federation, which governs sports there, they're like, you know what? Everyone just calm down. We're going to create an additional slot for an additional girl to compete so that no one can say that this transgender girl took away anyone's slot. And if she happens to win, there's first, second, and third place. If she wins any of those, we're going to have 2 first places, 2 second places, 2 third places. It was lovely. It was just a lovely, instead of a zero sum, somebody's going to lose out here. They were like, let's create more opportunities for participation, more opportunities, for people to succeed. And it diffused the situation in such a beautiful way. And instead of stories about, oh my gosh, look at California being extreme and supposedly disadvantaging non-transgender girls and just fueling this flame, which is making life a living hell for these kids and for transgender people. It ended up being a beautiful, positive story. The headlines were the young woman did, I think she placed, not first, but something, second or third. And there was a beautiful story of her standing next to another girl on the podium, the other girl saying very positive things about what a great experience it was competing with her. It was just lovely. We need more of that. We need more of that kind of mentality.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear you saying is you're walking the talk. You've spent your career advocating for breaking down walls for all people and building bridges for all people. You're saying even now, as divisive as it is, as zero sum as the rhetoric has become, we actually need to stick to our principles and continue to kind of advocate for everybody and give everybody the benefit of the doubt to find space for all people to be accepted.
Thank you for that. Yes, we can both. What I really want to say is we can both stick to our principles and hold out an olive branch and come up with creative new policies and approaches that address the concerns that people have, even if we don't share them, even if sometimes we think they're not very well founded and sometimes they are not. It's okay to bring people along, to recognize that it's a good thing to meet people where they are. And there's nothing wrong with coming up with policies that may seem like, I wouldn't even call them compromises. They might get labeled that in a negative fashion. I mean, some people could criticize that policy, I suppose, but I think you're missing the point. It's not compromise in the sense of compromising a principle. It's just being creative, realistic, pragmatic, and not elevating sort of abstract ideology over real people. We can come up with ways to be more inclusive.
Yeah, I hear that. And by the way, I know this case, the track athlete in Southern California. My brother, sister, and I grew up down there, competed in the California Interscholastic Federation. And I absolutely clued in on the fact that that kid and all of her competitors were having a ball. Like they were arm in arm at the end of the meet. And to me, it underscored the thing that got a little lost in the rhetoric, which was high school sports, by and large, are about giving kids the chance to explore their bodies, to compete, to play, to enjoy one another, to see what they can do, how they can elevate their ability. And, all this sort of politics and rhetoric kind of was a sideshow that got away from the fact that, hey, those kids absolutely did what they set out to do, and they all recognized it.
It was beautiful, wasn't it?
It was.
I know. Sometimes I think, it's more the adults who get hung up on, almost sometimes going out of our way to find a reason to be offended or to get into these political or ideological battles. Yeah, and the older I get, the longer I've been doing advocacy, the less I think that is a good approach. We really need to be much more flexible and pragmatic and more focused just on what do people need and how could we just come up with some way of doing things that accommodates the concerns that everyone has.
Well, thank you for being the grown up in the room. I would observe, in contrast to you, is perhaps at risk of indulging a temperature raising suggestion, but the president of the United States seems to be a practitioner of demagoguery, of really inflaming situations. And in fact, I think he's on the record as saying he likes to reserve attacks on trans people as an election issue because it scores points with people that they might bring over to their side. What's your assessment of the tone and the policies that the second Trump administration is setting for the country as relates to trans rights right now?
Deeply, deeply concerning. I'm never have I been more afraid for, transgender people in this country than I am now. I've been doing transgender advocacy, gosh, for a long time, 30 some years. And what we've been seeing is just this very steady progress, that the country was getting more used to transgender people, kind of slowly learning about transgender issues and really opening up. In my lifetime, things have changed incredibly. I mean, when I was transitioning, virtually no insurance covered that care. I paid out of pocket. Everybody did, and which is really for some of the care quite difficult and burdensome. And then now it's completely the opposite because of the Affordable Care Act. everyone's covered just about, like, and so that's been a complete shift. But that's just, and even the sports issue, there've been so many wonderful policies. Now we are really losing ground on all of these issues now. All of the progress that has been made is being very rapidly dismantled, very rapidly. And that deeply concerns me. And just the demonization of transgender people. This administration is fixated, is obsessed with transgender people, and they crossed a line that others in the past have not crossed. I mean, we've had, administrations, even Trump in his first administration was somewhat negative about transgender people, but nothing like this. They, the official policy of the Trump administration, and it's articulated in a bunch of executive orders, is that transgender people are morally depraved. I mean, they're openly calling transgender people dishonest, deceptive, that they don't have loyalty, really should not be allowed to exist. I think the goal of this administration is to eliminate all the health care, any legal recognition or protection, and to force transgender people to live in their birth sex. I think they really intend to do that. They intend to make something that you could call like compulsory conversion therapy required. And they'll start with, they'll try to start with people they have direct control over, like people who are incarcerated, kids who are in the juvenile justice system. I think that is their vision. They really want to not just give affirmative legal protections or take away like affirmative legal protections for transgender people, but I think they literally would like the arm of the government to come in and force us all to no longer be transgender and to be required by law to live in your birth sex.
What do you think explains this extreme shift on the part of Donald Trump and his administration?
I think they see it as a political bonanza for them. I think, as you noted, Trump says, "Oh, I want to save the transgender issues for when I really need them politically." I think they have recognized that they can exploit the fact that most people in the country don't know a transgender person. We know that there's actually polling. I was kind of surprised by this, but polling shows that I think it's more than 76% of people in this country are not aware of knowing a transgender person. That's really bad. That means, so, most people, you say transgender, they don't attach a human being to it at all. They never encountered an actual person that they know to be transgender, so they just can fill in the blank with their imagination. And boy, this administration is there to give them the worst possible image of transgender people, to make them think that we're depraved, demonic, even violent, dangerous.
It's really disturbing.
It's disturbing. Sorry, disturbing for me to talk about it, honestly. But I use it politically. It's just so effective to make people have an enemy. I mean, we know that sadly about human nature. That's like those chilling scenes from 1984 with the hate sessions. When everyone's like collectively hating on a particular group, and people do respond to that. It's just, I think we're all vulnerable to that, to feel good about yourself by saying and believing negative things about another group of people. And the transgender people are, I would say, along with immigrants, those two groups are the number one targets of this administration.
Yeah, and I want to underscore a point you're making as someone who's come to know a number of trans people in my life, have encountered it first as an issue where I just didn't understand, and then realize that people who've made that transition are some of the most courageous people I've ever come across, period, full stop. To realize that they have to run against so much convention, so much expectation to be who they were meant to be. We should be celebrating trans people as a model for so many different people who are unsure of themselves, because it's the ultimate show of confidence and faith that they will be accepted for who they really are. Yeah, to me, it's the sooner that more people can connect with someone in that situation, the better. And yet that's not the state we're in. It is a very scary time. So Shannon, from From a legal perspective, as you say, the federal policy is to basically make people live in their birth sex. What are the legal fights that have happened and are brewing to protect trans rights in particular?
Gosh, yeah. So this administration was in office like literally one day, and they started dismantling some of the most important protections that have taken decades to put together. Trump banned transgender people from the military and instituted really punitive federal prison policies that require people to lose transgender people in prisons to receive no medical care, and for all transgender women to be housed in men's prisons, which is incredibly dangerous. There are a small group of transgender women who have been recognized to be so vulnerable that they've been housed in women's prisons. And NCLR, where I work, and another legal organization, Glad Law, within days of the administration coming into power, when we saw they had issued that policy, we immediately went to court to try to stop it, because everyone knows those women, when they're transferred to men's prisons, will be raped, and repeatedly. I mean, it is horrific. It is horrific. We've managed to hold it off till now, and I hope we continue to, but we won initial victories. It's on appeal now. We'll see what happens. We also immediately rushed in to challenge the military ban, because that was another issue where once you allow the ban to take effect, thousands of people would be kicked out of the military. It's very difficult to put that back together, to fix that once you allow that to happen. And we were successful initially, then the Supreme Court stepped in and has now allowed that ban to go into effect. But those are two big issues. But healthcare is the other big one. The administration immediately started, denying federal funding to facilities that provide transgender healthcare, reversing non-discrimination policies under the Affordable Care Act, just doing anything and everything it could to destroy transgender people's ability to get health care in this country. They took away the right for transgender people to get passports that match your gender, reversed policies that allow transgender people to access homeless shelters. There used to be State Department travel alerts for LGBT people and other groups, other vulnerable groups in our country, to let people know, hey, be careful, or don't travel to this country. You may be targeted because you're transgender, or because you're gay, or they do it for religious minorities in this country. They immediately erased transgender people off that website. So they no longer provide transgender people with potentially life-saving information about where it may be dangerous for you to travel. Same with missing persons. Now you can't even, the federal missing persons agency will not identify transgender people. I mean, it's really extreme, cruel, and comprehensive. It is across the board. Rolled back protections for transgender students. Told transgender federal employees you don't get health care coverage, and you can no longer use restrooms at work. It has been shocking, catastrophic, and just targeting every conceivable protection for transgender people.
My stomach is sinking. That list is really horrifying. I want to talk about two things. One, the fight in the courts, but also kind of policy interventions from any number of actors. But let's start with the courts. What's your read on what's happening with these cases and the tenor of court cases, given the seeming compliance of the Supreme Court with the Trump administration?
Overall, there have been more than 400 cases challenging Trump policies, not just about LGBT issues, but across the board. And about a third of them have been successful in getting preliminary relief from the courts. And that's about the same statistics with LGBT issues. We've filed lots of challenges and gotten good results, probably even higher than a third. Courts have been pretty receptive to understanding that these policies are discriminatory, that they're often just based on pure animus towards transgender people. They don't even have any possible rational justification. So that's been encouraging. And, that's been true for, had victories in front of very conservative judges sometimes. The lower courts have been really good, really responsive. But the problem has come in from the Supreme Court. And then I will say that most of those victories have mostly been upheld on appeal too. So the next level, the federal circuit courts of appeal have been generally pretty good too. But the Supreme Court is just up there wreaking havoc. Just doesn't care about these lower court rulings. And the lower courts are the ones who hear the evidence, hear testimony, have time to really look at the facts on the ground and to listen to what the government's saying to justify these policies. I mean, their just opinions are so much more well-founded. In the Supreme Court, they don't have, they're basing this is all in the so-called shadow docket, which just means these are not cases that have been fully litigated and adjudicated below and that are making their way up to the Supreme Court in the normal fashion. And then the court hears argument and briefing and makes a final decision. This is like emergency appeals to the Supreme Court. What will happen again and again? We'll get a good positive federal district court, like a preliminary injunction, blocking the policy from going into effect. The federal government will appeal that to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal will be like, no, we're not going to overturn it. We agree with the federal district court. And then they'll do an emergency motion to the U.S. Supreme Court for an emergency stay. And the court has been granting those just almost across the board and just almost universally allowing every single Trump policy to go into effect. And they're doing that with the transgender issues as well. And it's been, that is really discouraging, harmful. It's terribly harmful to our system of justice.
Could you help me parse the distinction between an emergency ruling and a more complete ruling by the Supreme Court? I mean, are they basically saying we're going to defer to the executive branch and to the president and his policies while we wait for these cases to formally make their way to us so that we can review them more thoroughly? Or is it something different?
No, Greg, what you just described is so beautifully. That is exactly what they're doing. They're jumping in and saying, yes, we're going to automatically defer to the federal government, allow them to enforce even the most extreme policy, even the policies that are most obviously based on nothing but hostility towards a minority group, even policies that just shockingly disregard the most basic civil liberties and civil rights. We're going to let that all just take effect, be enforced, while these cases very slowly work their way through the court system. And we get, final judgments after trial that then go through a lengthy appeals process that then finally may go back up to the Supreme Court. So that's almost the whole ball of wax right there in terms of just the practical impact, because it takes so long for a case to make its way through that long, slow process of getting final judgments at every level. That takes a really long time. It takes years. So the Supreme Court is basically, in the meantime, just letting this administration take a wrecking hammer to just foundations of our society and to entire communities who are really, really suffering.
So if we can read into the Supreme Court's moves in the last year, it seems like they're on one hand saying we're deferring to elected leaders, the president and Congress, or we're deferring to states. Does that point to a pathway for salvaging all the progress we've made on civil rights for everybody in this country?
Well, theoretically, I think it would be very naive of us to think that there's going to be a lot of consistency in the way the Supreme Court approaches these issues, just because for example, they recently issued a decision saying that states can ban healthcare for transgender minors. That's a very pro kind of states' rights case. They basically said, look, states can regulate medical care. If some states want to ban this care, they're perfectly entitled to do that. Well, they have a case in front of them now challenging states' laws that protect young people from conversion therapy. So if they were going to be consistent, in their states' rights approach, they would affirm those laws. They'd be like, right, we just said states can ban transgender health care for minors. Other states want to ban conversion therapy. Great, you do that. I hope we win that case, but I'm not counting on it. I think they could easily do the complete opposite in this because they don't like these laws. It's good we do need to try to hold their feet to the fire. We need to try to get them to be consistent. We need to say, look, you can't apply different principles here because this involves LGBT people. But I think we should not be naive and think that there's anything compelling them to be consistent. They don't have to be. They are the final word on on the law of the land in this country. And, they don't necessarily have to be consistent.
I think you're referring to the case about gender affirming care in Oklahoma. And when I first read about that, I thought, oh, I wonder if that basically opens the door for blue states, where I live on the West Coast, to say, we're going to provide gender affirming care. And yet, I think you're also highlighting that you have to look at that Supreme Court decision alongside their other decisions that are letting the Trump administration do whatever it wants, basically. And so if they're going to rip funding away from healthcare systems for providing gender affirming care, those two things effectively work to ban gender affirming care in lots of places around the country.
That's right. That's right. And I hope I'm not appearing to be overly cynical here, because I'm really not. We need to try to force the court to be consistent and to act with integrity and to have intellectual honesty. And it's so important that we are out there loudly saying that and explaining that to people and pointing out, hey, you just ruled this way in this case about a kind of healthcare that a lot of conservative people don't like. You shouldn't apply a different rule because this is a law that's more associated with blue states, a more progressive point of view. I mean, we need to say all those things. And I do think they have some sort of mitigating impact on the court. I just at the same time, we can't count on that. We certainly can't count on that.
Yeah, there's all kinds of narratives around, whether it's sort of an originalist philosophy and them trying to interpret strictly what the Constitution and the founders said, or whether they're just partisans who were nominated by Trump and are doing his bidding. Both bad news for a lot of social progress over many decades.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the Supreme Court is certainly affected by politics. I'm sure the justices on the court sincerely believe they're trying to apply the law in a fair manner, and they do care. I think they want to feel intellectually justified in their decision making. They're human beings. They're affected by other factors like we all are. All we can do, and I'm a lawyer, so I really have to do this, is do the very best we can to present arguments to them in a way that has a chance of reaching them. And I think, the challenge for those of us who have cases in front of the Supreme Court, since it's dominated by conservative justices, is to try to think of new, creative ways to get them to understand our communities and our issues in a way that resonates with their conservative framework. And I'll tell you, oh my gosh, like the case that's in front of the court right now about conversion therapy, there's a Colorado law that prevents licensed mental health providers in Colorado from subjecting a minor patient to treatments that are popularly known as conversion therapy that are designed to make a kid not gay or not transgender to change their sexual orientation or their gender identity to achieve a predetermined outcome. And I'm very worried about how that case is going to come out. These practices are really dangerous. There's a lot of research now that shows that young people who go through conversion therapy are at dramatically increased rate of suicidality, really high, like something upwards of 2/3 of young people who are put into conversion therapy attempt suicide. Not just have suicidal ideation, literally attempt suicide. And there's a really powerful amicus brief in this case from parents of young people who died by suicide after going through conversion therapy. It's very real. That really happens. And you can imagine if there was a medication or another treatment that resulted in death and there's no evidence that it even works or does anything beneficial, of course we would say you can't do that. And it shouldn't be any different here just because it involves gay and transgender kids. It's heartbreaking to think that these laws might even possibly be struck down. But in an effort to reach these conservative justices, we got amicus briefs from conservative people. So I think the single most powerful brief in this case is from a very conservative Catholic therapist who's primarily sees in her practice young people, LGBT young people from conservative Catholic families. And she's devout Catholic. She completely adheres to Catholic teaching that about human sexuality, that the only appropriate place to be sexual is if in a heterosexual marriage. So she thinks gay people should be celibate, and that if you're transgender, you should not transition. That's consistent with Catholic teachings. That is her personal religious beliefs. She strongly supports this law banning conversion therapy. She has seen firsthand, and she describes the terrible impact of conversion therapy on these young people. It destroys them. It destroys them. It breaks them. It causes them to turn against their parents, because conversion therapy tells kids that the reason you're gay or you think you're gay, the reason you're transgender or you think you're transgender is because you had bad parenting. It causes kids to hate their parents and to blame their parents for them being gay or transgender, and it destroys their faith. It destroys their faith because they're told that God wants you to change, that if you do what I'm telling you, you will change. And then you can't, doesn't work. These therapies do not cause anybody to change. And so then the young person ends up feeling totally betrayed by God and by their faith community. So all it does is fracture families, drive young people away from their faith. And this conservative Catholic therapist is telling the court that and saying, look, she's developed a whole treatment approach to these young people that's respectful, that strengthens them, that recognizes at the end of the day, everybody's got to choose how they're going to live their lives. And, I'm hoping that her voice will reach the court.
It's as if she sees her ultimate duty as person affirming as opposed to gender affirming.
That's so good, Greg. I love that. And we should be more like that.
Yeah.
We need to be more respectful of the fact that there are spectrum of people in our community, including LGBT people who do hold very conservative religious beliefs, and they count too. They matter too.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the legal side of this in the courts. What could various actors, whether it's Congress or states, what could they be doing? And I'm not going to use the language of firewalls and bulwarks, but what could states be doing to set examples for other places in the country?
Just honestly, right at the moment, a lot of it is just like, hold the line, please. Well, we do need states, if federal funding is stripped away for healthcare for transgender people, we need states to step up and fund that. That is critical. That is so important. We need states to defend their school policies that protect LGBT kids from bullying and harassment, and that allow them to be themselves at school. And they are, so far, they're really stepping up and vigorously defending those policies in the face of Trump's attempt to take all federal funding away from school districts that protect LGBT kids. That's what's going on right now. We need them to, defend their anti-discrimination policies, just basic stuff, that allow transgender people to use the right restrooms, for example. This is so real. I'm a transgender man. According to a bunch of Trump policies, I should only be allowed to use, women's restrooms, which I can't. That doesn't make any sense, and it wouldn't work, and I couldn't do it. So without, causing a huge scene and scaring women and getting in trouble probably for doing that. So, it's really it just means they don't want me or people like me to go anywhere. I can't work or go to school or go to court. I'm a lawyer. And there are now many states in this country that are complying with these Trump policies about federal courthouses, that I can't use a restroom in a federal courthouse. mean, that really hampers my ability to be a lawyer, So just holding the line on these basic laws and policies that are just super basic anti-discrimination protections that allow people to be part of the community. So it really is a lot of it's defensive right now, and then some of the more positive, affirmative things like funding healthcare, using state money to fund healthcare. We're going to need that.
This might be a little bit of a tangent, but it keeps coming up, and I feel like I'm seeing it kind of enter the mainstream narrative now. Excuse me. Is this issue of funding? Is there a legal argument? I mean, the Trump administration is using federal funding as a hammer to enforce its viewpoint and doing it often in contradiction to congressionally approved spending bills. Is there a legal argument for cities or states to say we're going to withhold federal taxes unless the Trump administration complies with the law?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Gosh, I haven't heard that one. Yeah, I don't know. I can't tell you the answer to whether there's a legal strategy for that or not. But what I can tell you is that the law is not set in stone. And I think that we need to be really bold and try new, very bold things. And now's a good time to think big, not think small. So if there is any, I think people should try anything and everything we can think of to slow down this very terrible machinery of cruelty and stripping people of their dignity and human rights. Anything we can do to non-violently, I should say, to stop that and slow that down is worth doing.
And I don't mean to use a pugilistic metaphor, but it seems like people are going to need to get more bare knuckled to fight for what they believe. I want to step back to talk about trans youth. I mean, we've talked about some of the cases there, Shannon. With trans young people facing bans on gender affirming care, on the bathroom bans, on sports bans, as you mentioned, not to mention becoming political punching bags, even from, kind of once sympathetic politicians, Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg, for example. What could we be doing to show trans youth that we have their backs?
Oh my gosh, like writing letters to the editor and posting comments everywhere, like Reddit. Reddit is huge, by the way. Reddit is a huge source of influence on. I think it's the biggest influence, social media influence on people in this country. So get in there, and one thing we've learned. This is really important. That when you see people saying hateful or ignorant things that are not correct, one thing we know is that directly confronting that and telling people you're wrong or you need to educate yourself or here's the fact, it actually does not work. It actually backfires. So, and it ends up amplifying the misinformation even more. So what works so much better is engaging people, just being like, hey, I hear what you're saying about this, but here's something to think about. Or yeah, I hear what you're saying. You're worried about this healthcare for trans kids. I'm worried about that somewhat too. But I met like my cousin has a transgender kid, and I have to say, when I saw them go through this process, they sure were a lot happier. Just like reach out like you would to someone you genuinely care about and wanted to constructively engage with. The sort of more gentle, sideways approach is way, way more effective. If we had an army of people doing that on social media, it would be completely transformative. It really would. So just speaking out, engaging in a constructive, gentle way to bring people along, and then letting your elected officials know, I do not support these anti-transgender measures. You're not going to get my vote for that. I'm against that. People don't contact their legislators. We all hear, that we're supposed to, but very, 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 very few of us do it. And it has an enormous impact. They literally count the number of contacts. I mean, it really actually matters a lot more than people think. Run for office with local positions, get on your local school board. Basically, just good old fashioned get involved in local politics and speak up in national politics. And if more of us did that, it would really make a big, big difference.
I'm curious from a movement perspective with the LGBTQ community right now. Are you seeing alliances form with other groups that are also under attack? You mentioned immigration, you mentioned reproductive rights, you mentioned racial justice. Are different movements collaborating because they recognize that they're in common cause?
Yes, there's a lot of collaboration. we always do need more. And I'll just say, like, across the board, across all those movements, I do think there is a bit of a divide right now between people who sort of want to keep to the what I view as the old ways of being very directly confrontational, and others, and you can tell I'm in this camp, who think we need to new ways of engaging, that we need to change the ways we talk about these issues, and that we need to do a lot more to build bridges and bring other people along with us. So that's an interesting division that I think cuts across all of these movements. We do need more. We do need more cross movement collaboration. I can give you an example: is the terrible things that are happening to. Uh, I would say undocumented people, but now it's not just undocumented people. It's just anybody who looks like they might be an immigrant to this country. People being, very viciously, physically waylaid and subjected to, violence and interrogation and incarceration by immigration authorities, by ICE. Of course, there has been a lot of focus on that and a lot of pushing back. But for example, I don't think people know, like, that is a huge issue for the gay community. Like, a lot of the people who are being assaulted by ICE officials are gay people who've come to this country seeking asylum. And I think a lot of people don't know, even if you have a pending asylum claim, you're here, perfectly legally, you're doing all the right things, you can be deported. They don't have to wait for your asylum case to be adjudicated, and you can be sent back to the country that you're fleeing from. And there are gay people, right as we speak, living in terror of that happening. Gay asylum seekers living in terror of that happening. But, like, I haven't really seen the gay movement be visible in that battle. I don't see us talking about that. I don't see us working as closely as we should with the other groups, speaking out and trying to fight back against that terrible, what is probably the single worst human rights abuse happening as a result of Trump policies in this country right now. Just people being randomly accosted with no due process and locked up and deported and sent to terrible places where they're going to be killed or tortured. So we do need more cross movement, working together.
Got it. But I think of you as one of the crusading pioneers advocating for transgender rights and LGBTQ rights in general. As both an attorney and an activist, I think of you as an activist. What sustains you through the losses and the backlash that are so prevalent right now?
Well, I consider myself to be such a fortunate person. I've had so much help and kindness from so many people along the way. And I think maybe one of the reasons that I do feel so strongly about not demonizing people and not writing off whole groups of people and not contributing to these divisions based on labels like red state, blue state, or conservative, progressive, or transgender, non-transgender. Like, when I was in high school, I was in a really conservative high school. I came out as a member of the LGBT community. My parents didn't understand that. I had a horrible time. My parents were rejecting me. I was being brutally harassed at school. I mean, physically harassed every day. I was scared every day. School was not safe. Home was not safe. I don't think I would have survived that experience because I was so depressed and hated myself so much and was so scared. And life was horrible. I didn't want to be in it anymore. But I had a high school teacher, a government teacher, who saved my life just by being, I still cry after all this time talking about it, just by being kind and checking in on me every single day. And he was a conservative, evangelical Christian. He told me, he said, look, I think being gay, as you know, because we were friends already, I knew his beliefs. He said, I think it's a sin. He said, but I don't think it's any more sinful than many things I do and have done. He was just so non-judgmental. It didn't matter that he held those beliefs. He was just a wonderful, decent, kind human being. And such a powerful experience. And then I've lived all over. I went to school in New York and lived in San Francisco and DC and all that. And recently moved back to this very small conservative Texas town where I was born and spent a lot of my childhood. And people here have been they've known me since I was born, so they're aware. that I'm transgender, but they've been so kind and supportive and loving. And we probably don't agree on almost anything politically, but that doesn't stop them from being me. I feel very supported, loved, and included here. And that's just given me so much hope.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I think what it says is you have faith that there are people who don't share your views or live your life who could be brought around to just recognize the humanity of one another. And it's why you keep advocating, because you believe people can be brought around, that there is reason for hope.
Yeah, I've experienced it so much in my own life. I know it to be true. And it kind of breaks my heart that we drive those people away because we actually do need them.
Let me ask the opposite question. What wins do you most relish for the movement? When do you know you're getting somewhere?
There's the legal victories that we win that are they're very important. But what's I should say not but and what is even more important is just getting people comfortable with, with us, with LGBT people, with transgender people. I mean, for example, oh my gosh, the biggest example of that I know I'll ever see in my lifetime is what the change in our society as a result of the marriage equality. And it's not that marriage is the be all and end all. It's not that everyone needs to get married. The point is like, oh, marriage is so great, and we fought for that because yay marriage. I mean, marriage is great, but you know what I'm saying, that but the reason that that was so important was that it completely changed the way people in this country see gay people. I mean, it went from when before we achieved marriage equality, many people in this country, when they would hear the word gay or think about gay people, they would think of that gay people are sinful, that they're the opposite of family, the opposite of commitment, that gay people are incapable of forming real family bonds, incapable of commitment, that it's all about transient sexual interest, that gay people don't have anything to do with parenting, marriage, that kind of thing. And now when people hear the word gay, they think of marriage. They literally associate gay people with the institution that stands for family in most people's mind. I mean, wow. So whether you get married or not, as a gay person, you have benefited hugely from that victory. It literally transformed the way our country sees the gay community. I mean, how awesome is that? I mean, I wish we could find the equivalent of that for transgender people. That would be pretty cool. The military case is a little bit like that with transgender people because the plaintiffs in those cases are so outstanding. I mean, my gosh, anybody, and I do mean anybody, would admire them. They're amazing people. They're courageous. They've made huge sacrifices. They're doing like these incredibly impressive things in the military. And I love having those people out in the press and I think before the Trump banned transgender people in the military, probably most people in this country weren't even aware that transgender people are serving in the military. And now they are, now they know, wow, thousands of transgender people have joined the military. And I think, most people in this country admire military service, and it helps people have a positive view of transgender people. But that's what I want people to see about, my community is I don't want them to think of us as victims or that we need help or how sad or, I want them to see us as, you know, contributing to the greater good and just like somebody who would be a good, neighbor or a friend or, somebody doing positive things for our society.
Yeah, it's such a perfect example of why the legal fights and the political fights are worth it, because they can, in some cases, and they're rare, they can lead to cultural change that is not just good for the people who were experiencing discrimination. It's good for all of us. It takes some amount of hate out of the system for everybody. So thank you for sharing that story. Let me land on one last question, because this is a show about asking what if questions. As an attorney involved in this movement, what if we could convene a constitutional convention, Shannon? What amendments would you be most keen to offer?
Yeah, no, gosh, that's a neat question. It is fun to think about stuff like that. We should. I'm glad you do that. We should think about that more. What if we could just do something new and different? What would we do? You know, that's a hard one. I'm not really sure. What I would want to do, what I'd really want to do, is figure out some way to bake in more profound, really meaningful protections for women. That has been one of our biggest failings, and it still is. I mean, the level, and we're so used to it. We are like frogs boiled in the pot, but we're so used to the level of sexual violence that women endure in this society, to just systemic discrimination in every arena, from women's sports to every sector of employment. Women just in their personal lives, so many women now work outside the home and then get stuck with doing almost all the labor in the home. Women are the ones who largely take care of people who are older and ill and dependent. Women are largely still the people who take care of children. I mean, Jimmy Carter wrote a great book about this in his old age, about how if there was one issue globally that would make the biggest difference, it would be to end some of the violence and discrimination against women that just cuts across every single culture. So I don't know. It would be cool to try to think of what would that look like? It'd be something. I mean, you could say it'd be something like an equal rights amendment, but I don't think that's likely enough. That's not. I just don't think that's enough. That we would. What I would like to do is try to figure out some way to not just have like formal equality, which that would be the Equal Rights Amendment, but something that more substantially takes into account the roles that women end up having to play in terms of caretaking. Well, childbirth obviously is one too, but just to try to structure it would be neat to try to think of a way to structure our society in a way that prioritized and protected um, the things that women end up having to largely do. And we could, because we've tried the other way, where let's just pretend that's not the case and provide like a level of formal equality for everyone, like treat women the same as men. And you can't discriminate based on sex, regardless of whether it's a man or a woman. And we need that too. I mean, that's obviously got to be a component, but it's just not enough. It's not enough. And everything what that ends up is like, yes, women now can be treated the same way as men, but all the extra labor and work that they do is ignored and becomes invisible. And then there's so much just violence against women that is never addressed. So,
I mean, what I'm hearing there is equality is the baseline, but I think the word you might be looking for is full recognition of women and all the roles they play. And if we can take care of half the population, it probably makes it a lot easier for us to take care of even smaller minority groups, because we've got that in us and we recognize that the muscle memory we're building is recognition.
I love that, Greg. That's good. I love it. Let's do it, buddy. Let's rewrite the Constitution.
Today's conversation with Shannon Minter reminds us that civil rights are not abstractions. They're lived every day in families, in schools, in prisons, in the military, in churches, and in courtrooms. Protecting the rights of any minority protects everyone's rights. Standing up for one person affirms the dignity of us all. So what if the West Coast held the line, protecting the rights of all LGBTQ people, especially the trans people so often singled out by the Trump administration and other hateful forces? What if we supported trans people and encouraged them to flourish in the same way we'd want anyone to flourish? This is exactly where political and personal sovereignty meet. And this moment tests our democratic mettle to stand up for everyone's rights in order to claim our own. I'll leave you with a question Shannon inspired. If it's not enough to ask how the West Coast can build a firewall around LGBTQ rights, then how might we rise above the divisive discourse? How might we invite more constructive conversations with people who may just need a chance to recognize our common humanity? And here's another what if. What if liberals and progressives, believers in broad civil rights, stopped hating on Donald Trump and his destructive policies, and instead pitied him for needing fear and division to fuel his fragile sense of worth? What if we even thanked him for arousing our public purpose, reconnecting us to civic duty, and reminding us to stand more firmly together? In doing so, We claim not just our pronouns, but our collective ones. We, us, ours. Thanks for being with me on Pacific Time. If you found this conversation valuable, please follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, share this episode with a friend, and leave a review. It helps us grow this community of West Coasters asking the big what if questions. And then you can join the conversation on YouTube, Substack, LinkedIn, Instagram, and hey, maybe soon, Reddit. Thanks for being part of this very special conversation. I'll see you next time.